Antoine Roney, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Thank you.
First, I wanted to say, I was sorry to hear about your brother, loss of your brother, and he was someone that I don't think we never played together. Um, I think we met maybe once, but I really admired his playing, and he was someone, especially for chromaticism and enclosure, and all of those great concepts that he really kind of he took the next step of evolution from Miles Davis. You know, something that I talk to my students about all the time, and so his music is will be sorely missed. And again, I'm sorry to hear about. Um,
Yeah, it's a hard one. I'm still dealing with it every moment that passes. With my brother. But yeah, I was saying that we he was always into music. From like uh, from since we were babies. Well, actually, it was extended. It's coming from my grandfather on my mother's side, who was played guitar, trumpet, and tuba, and he played in the Frankie Fairfax band in Philadelphia. And Dizzy Gillespie was in that band. He knew Charlie Christian and all them folks. We didn't actually get to. I didn't. My mother and father split up, so I didn't really know him until later in life. I tell you how we met. But my brother kind of knew him, but he the one that introduced my father to the trumpet. And my father had a trumpet. My brother used to go behind the couch with my father kept it, blow it, and my mother would let him blow it. And he blew a note, and uh, and my mother's so excited. And my father got home, he like, showed that he could blow a note. And when he blew a note, my father got mad. He put the trumpet like way up on top of the cabinet somewhere. He said, "I told you don't let him play my horn." So my grandmother bought him a horn, and he started going to the Settlement Music School. And I was young. He was what I was. I guess five, two, three, I was 2 years old. I remember all of that stuff. Though. I was 2 years old. And as time went on, I guess when I was around 3 or 4, I wanted to play the saxophone. But we went to the store and I got a little toy saxophone and all that stuff. But I used to hear my father talk about, because they used to come up, go to New York and hear Miles or hear all the jazz cats. When we was in Philly, and he would come back talking about Tony on the drums, and they called me Tony. So somewhere along the line, I guess I thought that I, wanted to play the drums or something. But I really wanted to play the saxophone. And one time we was in Philly. I mean, we was at my grandmother's house, and down in the basement, we took these boxes and we created a stage on the boxes. And then we stood on the boxes and we was trying to figure out the breaks on 7 steps to heaven at that young age. And the boxes was like, move, man, the boxes gave us more trouble than the song. But then my grandmother's basement, because in those days they had those basements where a trap door opened and they would shovel, a truck would drop coal down into the basement. And we would shovel the coal into the furnace. But on the other side of the basement, my grandmother created a bar kind of thing. So my father his and my uncle, would they have parties so they won't be on the street. So we would go down there and explore, and I found a metal clarinet in the
mm,
basement, and I thought it was a soprano saxophone, but it was a metal clarinet. That's all, so I couldn't play it. But years later, I was able to get a saxophone. I stopped playing drums. Well, actually, what happened was I wanted a saxophone. Stopped playing drums because my brother liked to tell the story that I was beating on the drums up in the hallway and on the top floor. My grandfather got mad. I'm like, stop, stop. And I wouldn't stop, and he came and kicked the drum. And then he broke the drum trying to get it off his foot. But after that, I wanted to, I really just wanted to pursue playing the saxophone. So we used to write, me and my brother used to write the music companies. You know, we get the Downbeat magazine. Now we were young out, man. I was maybe I must have been about 7 years old. But we used to write the all the companies, you know, on the advertisements, and we would get the catalog and the price list. And I would get the Selmer catalog, and I would draw out the, you know, the little reef, Henry Selmer, and I'll draw saxophones, and look at pictures of Coltrane. We would there's a station in Philly called WRTI, and we would listen to that all day long until they went off the air, and then they came on the air at 6:30 in the morning, and we would sit up like 6:15 and wait for them to come on the air. When they came on the air, they would play Miles Springsville every morning, you know. So we was like, he was into that, you know. And so I would write the companies. We go to the music store, and I brought a mouthpiece. I had a saxophone strap, and I had reeds, but I didn't have a horn. So you know, we would go to Boston because my father had like an apartment building in Boston, and we would go to Boston. When we was in Boston, there was a concert in the park, and it was Weather Report. You know, and I was into Wayne Shorter. You know, I knew all. So we saw you know, we went and saw it. I think the first band to open up was Maynard Ferguson. This was in 1972. Maynard Ferguson opened up with violin player Michael White. And then after Michael White was Maynard Ferguson, and then was Weather Report. We saw Weather Report, and at the end of the concert, we went around the back and, you know, to meet Wayne Shorter. And I was dressed like him, you know. So we called, we saw him and said, Mr. Shorter, because the security wouldn't let us go in. And Wayne came down, and that's when I met him. But when he came, I froze. And my brother and my sister is like, he wants to play saxophone like you and John Coltrane. So Wayne should have said, well, play the clarinet for a year or maybe 2 years, and then switch to one of these tenor saxophone. And that's what I did. So I got the clarinet. And what was interesting about that, because my brother was already studying, and he would always teach me his lessons. Like, he'd come back and he would share his lessons with me. Even before I had the instrument, I learned how to read, you know, through the cyclopedia. He would show me how to read, and he would share me his lessons. So when I got the clarinet, I kind of knew what to do. Once I can get a clear tone, I knew what to do. So in about a week, I was playing that. We were doing like Vivaldi duets, you know. And, you know, he would, you know, just him sharing me you know, I was learning how to play, you know, through his trumpet lessons. And he was studying with like really a great trumpet teacher named Sigmund Herring, who was the first trumpeter in the Philadelphia Philharmonic Orchestra under Leopold. And also who was studying at the time was Robin Eubanks. And Kevin Eubanks was playing trumpet, but he didn't ever want to play trumpet. He said, I want to play guitar. So we kind of, and we got lost touch with him because after a while we moved to DC, and then they kind of got back together in, you know, with an Art Blakey thing. But, you know, we studied a lot together, and me and my brother, we would listen to the records and analyze it and all that. We'd talk about this and talk about that. And I mean, all the way up until, you know, recent, we would spend all day and night just talking music and figuring out things. And, you know, so yeah, his passing was really touched me in a way that I can't explain.
Yeah, I'm sorry for your loss. Now, one thing that you were talking about, so you, when you wanted to play tenor, Wayne told you to play clarinet first,
Yeah.
and then to switch to tenor. And so the interesting thing, an interesting thing about that is that he was just kind of giving you the orthodoxy. That was like what everybody was doing. Coltrane did that, and I was talking to Doug Lawrence.
Mhm.
That's what happened with Doug Lawrence. Um, uh, Clarinet, alto saxophone, then tenor saxophone. J.D. Allen,
Yeah.
clarinet, alto saxophone, tenor saxophone, um, and I think a couple others that I interviewed told me the same thing. And although, of course, I knew that about Coltrane, I didn't actually know that that was like a common practice. Like the thing that was regularly suggested. Um, when you started on clarinet, did you what did you feel like? What advantage did that give you when you started playing tenor after that?
Well,
Do you feel?
when what happened with in those days, the saxophone still wasn't a legitimate instrument that you go and study.
Yeah.
So the saxophone was just a side instrument. Um, and so if you went to study music, you would have to go and study clarinet in those days. And then after that, I didn't really want to play alto. I wanted to play tenor.
Yeah.
My father got me an alto saxophone because he didn't think that I was tall enough to play tenor. And I got an alto, and in those days, they didn't teach. You couldn't go to take lessons on the tenor saxophone. Nobody would teach you on the tenor. You had to take lessons on the alto saxophone. All the way up until when I was in college, in the early 80s. I remember I was studying with a guy named Phil DeLibro, and he was like, yo, man, you got to, you know, play alto. But he let me play the tenor because I was in school, under the jazz program with Jack McLean. But the tenor, so you had to study alto. They had literature. Tenor didn't really have literature. Tenor literature was doubling trombone.
Mm.
Alto was dealing with violin and clarinet literature because the universal method was like pieces of close.
Right.
So, and those. Now, clarinet was actually really great for me because I could just pick up a saxophone and play. And I remember when I was really young in Philly, it was really great for music. And I used to go to the parks and see guys playing saxophones, and I used to cry because I wanted one. A friend of mine, I watched. I mean, I saw a lot of weird things, in those times in Philly when Rizzo was mayor. There was, in the communities, in the black communities especially, there was like a lot of, the police action, you know, roughing up guys. And then one of my friends had a King Super 20 with a silver bell and neck. And I remember I was looking at I had the catalog, man. This cat, and he was outside playing, and the cops took their horn and put it in the street, ran over his.
Oh goodness.
Oh man, I was like, so. But another friend of mine, his uncle had a saxophone, and I was in fourth grade, and I was playing clarinet. But when my teachers my teacher didn't when she didn't come to school and send a substitute teacher, I would cut school and we would go to my friend's house. And the saxophone was big, so I had to get on one end and he'd get on me, take it down the steps, and I get out and I'll play it. And I could play it because the clarinet, dealing with, for one, finger position, you had to hold those positions on the clarinet or it'll squeak, because of the.
Right, because of the holes. Yeah.
Right. So when I put my fingers on the saxophone, I already had the positions, and it's like playing the upper part of the clarinet, upper register of the clarinet. So it was easier for me to just pick up the saxophone and play it. And
Yeah, it's interesting. Clarinet is like, and what I try to do in my own clarinet playing and in my teaching approach is I try not to relate it to saxophone because most of the players that I'm talking to about clarinet are saxophone players that want to learn how to play clarinet.
yeah,
And it can become like a real kind of handicap if you're sort of translating, like if you're thinking, okay, well, on this horn it would be this note, and on this horn, but it's very useful to think of the lower part of the clarinet like an alto saxophone, where all the notes match the fingerings. Alto saxophone goes down a half step lower. Would be an E flat on clarinet, which is a B flat, would be the B flat on alto. And then above the break, it's like soprano, up until a certain point when the fingerings change, because the register key is a 12th and not a, an octave, which is and then obviously like the pressure is like all different because of the register key being a 12th and not an octave, and because clarinet basically is cylindrical until you get down to where the bell starts to fan out, whereas saxophone is conical, so it's getting bigger the whole time, obviously made out of different materials in all of that kind of stuff, but the harmonic series, the way that it responds, both of those instruments, is very different, and it takes a I started on alto saxophone, but I thinking about this, especially talking to you and talking to some other folks that I've talked to about it, it does seem like it would be a really a good advantage to start on that instrument, because of, even if it's just because of the finger positioning and the sort of unforgiving nature of the instrument.
But the clarinet, I if students are patient, uh, I don't think students they have enough patience to start on clarinet.
Yeah.
And when I was coming up, I'm sure it probably was like that with you at some point. Uh, I didn't. If I wanted to play an instrument, they didn't just go by me the instrument to play. They would take me to somebody, and the person would recommend what I should do. And so I want to play saxophone. I said, give me a saxophone, but you go to the music school, and they're like, no, you start on clarinet, and then you can go to a saxophone. So you had to go through those things at that time. What the clarinet I think is great for, definitely for finger position, because it's a little more intricate than saxophone and finger position, and it develops your embouchure. And it develops. It's easier for you to develop how to blow into the instrument and produce a good sound. Diaphragm. I remember the guys that point, stick the pencil in your stomach and all that stuff. So when you blow, you got to have certain position. And you understand how to reed vibrates, and it's all right there. So when you go to the saxophone, and then you can translate all of that from reed vibration, from blowing from the diaphragm, and actually saxophone can be fun if you start on a clarinet, because most of your understanding how to put the mind to the instrument and the fingers, all that is done on the clarinet. Saxophone, you just pick it up and you can kind of do things. The saxophone is a little bit, now today, I think it's a little bit more mature than the clarinet, because you can do more things, and you can compete with more of the technical instruments, especially from the alto saxophone point of view. The tenor had to evolve to that.
Yeah, you were talking about there not being, the kind of richness and depth of repertoire for tenor saxophone with respect to classical playing.
Right.
And it's still the case. There's a lot more music that's been written for tenor saxophone for classical, but still, if you go to study, at the university, conservatory or something, alto is going to be the primary instrument that you're going to play, because there's so much history, there's so much music. I recently finished my doctorate, and it was a classical a saxophone performance degree at CCM, and I played nothing but alto for the whole degree. I didn't even play any like soprano pieces or anything. It was all alto. And one thing that came out of that is in January 2020, so this past January seems like such a long time ago. It's not really that long ago. Um, I released my first classical project, and it was all Marcel Mule commissioned pieces.
You know.
Um, and but that music is like that's the stuff. But there was like no tenor rep when that stuff was written. There was no tenor rep. There was hardly any alto rep. I mean, that was part of the significance of Marcel Mule, right? So
I,
anyhow.
I studied from those books, and I studied on tenor on those books. Marcel Mule or BB Quiet or something like that.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
studied that stuff on tenor. I had a teacher in high school that that taught me on tenor, and I was going through that. But actually, I still go through that book. I have it on my stand right now. Going through, a lot of the Marcel Mule things.
Now I want to ask you, how do you feel like? I mean, do you feel like that stuff was particularly valuable for your style of playing?
Yes, yes, yes. It technically it allowed me to figure out how to go from one note to the next.
Mm.
Which even today I have some friends who play, and they really good jazz players. They can get up there and they can phrase all the big band phrasing and all of that, and they can take really good solos. But then to play intricately on the horn, they don't have the technique of like playing chromatic scales up and
Mm.
down the instrument and playing some of those things that I learned um, from those books. And I think when you I was really studying this music, jazz music, coming from Charlie Parker to Sonny Rollins and Coltrane and all those people, you have to understand that exists and find a way to put your fingers on those notes, going from one note to the next.
Yeah, something about Charlie Parker. Okay, of course you know the Bird movie, which basically depicted Charlie Parker as um, he was freakishly gifted. He never practiced. He just popped up and he was great. And womanizing and drug addiction and all that. They focused on that stuff, but they didn't really focus on all of the time that he obviously had to be spinning on the horn to do something that had never been done before. To hear in ways that didn't exist. The dude might as well have been from another planet. It was so different. One thing, and I know that he was during his lifetime. He was very um, he was apprehensive about sort of letting people know that he was like going to take saxophone lessons. So this would have been like after he was already, you know, the baddest dude on the planet. He was studying with a guy named Santi Runyon.
Yeah, I heard those stories. I heard the Santi Runyon. Santi Runyon was definitely a genius at inventing things. And him and Brillhart, them guys, they like revolutionized modern saxophone equipment. But Bird was very interesting. I was really close with Jackie McLean and a lot of people that knew Bird. Um, Bird definitely put a lot of time into the instrument and practiced all the time. Bird, he always practiced. I remember Jackie told me one time he walked into the room and Bird was staring at his horn. He was like looking at his horn. And Jackie came in and said, "Hey, Bird," and Bird stopped him from talking. He said, "I'm practicing." No, he was mental practice. He put a lot of time and always played the instrument. So, I mean, whatever that movie. I remember when that movie came out, and I was around a lot of the guys who grew up, who was around Bird, and they said none of it was really true. Dizzy said a lot of that wasn't true, and so Jackie got in touch with Red Rodney, because Red Rodney helped write the movies. Red Rodney, Panonica, and the Baroness, and it was from their point of view. It wasn't from any of the musicians' point of view. So
Hmm.
they didn't really have any insight on what Bird was really doing, other than how they saw him.
Right.
Then Rodney was really interested. He was just playing the game, and he because Jackie was trying to find out about some of the drug things they were was involved. He said that never really happened. We just created that for the movie. So a lot of the Bird movie wasn't true. They never did a tour down south. That never happened. So but Charlie Parker himself, Charlie Parker's incredible mind, and incredible musician.
Yeah, I mean, I owe so much to him, and not just in terms of what I play. None of what I play would sound the same with that. I mean, I might as well not play anything. I mean, he was so, so impactful on my playing. Um, but I'd also have not much to teach either. Because I'm teaching straight from the canon of Charlie Parker. Uh,
Yeah.
you know,
But Charlie Parker is interesting, and I'll just you had a lot of great alto players, and I think a lot of people slept on except Cannonball slept on Benny Carter.
mm,
Uh, Benny Carter was like he was like Coleman Hawkins on the alto, and he was playing
mm.
all them intricate. Uh, you know, Coleman Hawkins. Have you? What do you think of Coleman Hawkins? Or what is your
Oh, I mean, I love Coleman Hawkins. Um, I always think of uh, Coleman Hawkins and Lester Young, like as sort of opposing kind of styles.
yeah.
Uh, Lester was more sweet
Mm-hmm.
and kind of sophisticated in the matter of speaking. Coleman Hawkins was a little more husky, um, um, and of course, those legendary, uh, you know, cutting sessions that they got into. That in I always think of the Body and Soul solo, Coleman Hawkins, um, and I mean, both of those guys could really play the instrument. Um,
But Coleman Hawkins was really interesting about Coleman Hawkins was, I read his book and everything. I have no idea of where he comes from musically, because I know he was a cello player,
hmm,
and he went to conservatory at like 15, 16 years old playing cello. But then he evolved to the saxophone. But what Coleman Hawkins and you heard of Big Nick Nicholas, right?
say it again.
Big Nick Nicholas,
Mm,
the tenor player, that train wrote that tune, Big Nick. Well, Big Nick, he was a tenor player, really big guy, and I was talking to him, and he would always sing the verses of the songs and all this. But he the one that broke down a lot of things to me about, like, there was different styles of blues. You had Kansas City blues, you had Texas blues, you had blues coming from Chicago. You had blues coming from he broke down all the different blues, and he would sing the different blues, different styles of blues, which Bird played the Kansas City blues. But he told me, he said that Coleman Hawkins didn't like Louis Armstrong,
mm,
because he was in New York before Louis came to New York, and he thought Louis was a country bumpkin. He said he dressed all country, because those guys in those days were slick, had their little cufflinks. And he said, and Louis Armstrong didn't know harmony. He said, and I was thinking about that. I was listening to Coleman Hawkins, he was playing pretty intricate harmony
Mm.
way back then. I mean, his harmony was just as intricate as Diz and Bird. He was playing really intricate, arpeggios that he was playing. And so when he came to that body and soul, playing all that harmonic stuff, I could see where Louis was more riffing and playing melodic kind of ideas. But Coleman Hawkins was trying to play like what evolved to what Bird was doing. And Benny Carter followed Coleman Hawkins' uh, method of playing over changes, playing tunes. Which was really
So we kind of jumped right in, which is great. Um, I wanted to back up a little bit and just try to. Um, so you started on clarinet. What was going on in your house when you were growing up, as far as the music that was happening, um, and then uh, who were some teachers that you studied with, and maybe some sort of critical mentors.
okay. My in the household was jazz. My father would listen, and especially in those days, in that time, jazz was a very respected music. The people in the neighborhood, if you want to be at this mind frame and intellectual or whatever you want to, jazz is what you listen to, and rock and roll was coming, had was on the scene. You had the Motown things and all of that, but it wasn't as respected in the community as jazz at that time. It was just a fun music. So my father and then it was a period where jazz was really was the radical mind, was where rock and roll was commercial, and a lot of people thought that the commercial music was they called it modern day slave music, all that kind of stuff. So although we listened to all the commercial things and they had the TV shows like the American Bandstand and all of that, jazz was serious spiritual music that we listened to. And there was a few jazz on TV, but not as much as the rock and roll things. And rock and roll had to actually break the barriers, with some of the black artists versus the white artists. So it had its own revolution too. But we listened to a lot of jazz, and every Friday night, my father and his friends would come over with the records and play the records all the way until the next day. I'd make you records and argue about who was better on this and all of that. So we kind of grew up in that. And at that time, with the whole Black Power thing, and jazz was the voice of that. So in the streets, you hear like people would drive and they would play Coltrane really loud in their car, you know. And you go to the parks and everybody's playing congas and saxophones and bass in the parks, and it was it was part of that revolution, especially in Philadelphia, being that Rizzo was trying to uh, with the whole Black Panthers and all of that, was trying to relate that to the neighborhood and the police. So jazz was the backdrop of all of that
Hmm.
up until about in the 70s. And when the Jackson Fives came out, and he saw this really young group of Black artists, and then a lot of people started to go in that direction, um, just supporting the success of these young artists. But jazz was always the backdrop, and that's the way we grew up listening to jazz.
And
Um,
and
and,
who and who were maybe some early teachers and maybe mentor figures?
well, my brother, up until in Philadelphia, I had a teacher, uh, and I don't even remember her name. I just know she was Miss Levin. I'm still trying to, and her father actually ran the Settlement Music School. Um, and most of my teaching, learning at that time was through my brother coming home with his from his lessons,
Yeah.
and we sitting there learning how to. I was sitting there learning how to play what he was playing on those lessons, and then when we moved to D.C., um, I went to a school. I went to this school. I guess it's called the Washington Music School, and it was in this old building. And this guy, this guy, you go in there and it had that old smell and everything is old, antique. And this guy would take the lessons and he would fall asleep while I was taking my lesson. And then I hit the last note and he wake up, so it's good, one of those kind of things.
Hmm.
I didn't really get to study like really technical things until I got to high school. And now I went to Duke Ellington School of the Arts. And I went there. That was the first year that they put ninth grade in high school. Because in those days, you went to high school at 10th grade. But first year was ninth grade, I was there. And I studied with Wallace Clark on clarinet, and I studied with different saxophone teachers. The first one being this guy named Marty PQ, and I had to study the alto, and I don't think I had a tenor at that time. I studied alto, and um, and then I had another teacher named Evans. I forget, I can't think of his name. His last name was Evans. And then after that, my teacher was a guy named Bill Street, who I'm still in contact with. He teaches at a university in Canada. Um, but they all through them that I had, they show me different technical things. Marty PQ was into the universal method, and I remember that on page 243, he was teaching me about bridging and all of that stuff, and I went through. And he was into those sections where you had to play that line over and over and speed it up, on the universal method. And uh, the other guy, Evans, he was just a good motivator. He would, you know, I would come and I wasn't really prepared for my lessons, and then he would give me a speech. He says, "Now tomorrow is the first day of the rest of your life," kind of thing.
Mm.
But when Bill Street came on, he the one that brought the Marcel Mule things,
Mm.
and that was really intricate. That was really getting into more classical playing on the instrument. Then technical etudes. They had things where you played pianissimo and the loud and trills. Did do you 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 did all that stuff, and that really allowed me to play the saxophone, and I still live by those things technically. Like there was one thing where uh, this line that they was playing was in five groupings of five. And even now, I take some harmonic things and I put it in that phrasing to make it clear. When you're playing fast,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just playing. I find if I could find groupings of groupings of phrases and put it together, it's more clear than just playing eighth notes, or playing 16th notes or 4/4 kind of thing. So that's all coming from the Russell Mule thing.
And okay, and I was thinking about this, and I was trying to think about uh, when we when I first met you, and it was on the phone, and it seems like it might have been 10 years ago or something. It was a while ago,
Moves.
and we yeah, and you called me. You reached out to me because I think you were checking out some videos or something I was putting out,
Yeah.
and And so we got on the phone and started talking, had a real deep conversation. I feel like we became instant friends. Um, uh, and it just seems like anytime we talk, it's just gonna go straight deep. That's just what's gonna happen. There's no pretense. It just, hey, let's get right in, you know. And I always that's the kind of that's the kind of relationships I really dig. Um, you know, because you don't have to kind of hang out on the surface for a while to test the waters. And is it okay to actually say some stuff now? We can just get right in. And um, but
There's a few people that, and everybody, I'm not really a school person, but then when people ask me what school that they should go to, saxophone wise, I would recommend them to you because I think the way you teach is very thorough on the instrument from the lowest note to the highest note. But you also understand people in a way that uh, you give them what they need, but you don't put pressure on them to that they had to learn it this one way. You have like many different ways to approach something that might connect with a person who's thinking and different than the next person. And I admired that when I watched your videos that you was putting up, and I learned a lot from the videos. Because I'm always searching. I have my own ideas of how things go, but then to hear somebody else talk from their point of view, and I said, "Oh, I never really thought about it that way." You know? So it really helped me out, just mentally manipulating certain things. I still think about some of the lessons that you gave. It was they all were informative. I was waiting for the next one. Then they stopped, man. I was like, whoa. But I'm always looking technically. I'm coming from like when me and my brother, we sat up and just studied, and harmonically. Um, I remember one time my brother sat at the piano for a week straight, trying to figure out how to make everything fit. Um, my I was into Coltrane, and the Coltrane, and I got, I was always into Coltrane for Miles and all of that. But when I heard Meditations for Quartet, Crescent, and I was blown away. But what really took me away, because every year we used to go to Disney World. My father takes us to Disney World every Christmas. One Christmas, my brother was like, I don't want to go. And I couldn't, after I already said I was going to go, and he said I didn't want to go, so I had to go. And I went, and I came back home, and he said, check this out. And he put on a record, it was Live at the Birdland, Train Plan. I want to talk about you. And he played a solo over that tune that just, I never heard a saxophone play like that. So, and then we got the condenser, and he just didn't stop, and all that stuff was coming. So I was always striving to play like that, but I didn't want to play. I wanted to play like that. I didn't want to. I want to be able to create like that. I didn't want to play, and I learned a lot of those things from his condensers. Uh, but I try not to play them in my playing. I try to understand what it is and then play my version of that. So those things required a lot of technical, not just playing the arpeggios, but it's playing uh, those in between kind of phrases, in the middle of all of that, and moving up in minor third. Well, he did a lot of things. It wasn't a lot of people. Version of Coltrane to me is that they jumped on the pentatonic, but he did so many things, man. He was exploring the sharp nine, the sharp nine, flat nine chords, with the sharp nine, with a flat nine in the bass and sharp nine at the top. But a lot of stuff comes from Stravinsky, some of the Stravinsky things,
hmm.
and playing phrases off of those things.
You,
know,
you know,
so
I hear a lot of Chopin actually in Coltrane too.
mm,
Um, uh, it's it's like unusual, like the way that he would work that stuff into uh, his playing. And obviously, we all know that he was practicing out of the Slonimsky.
well,
Um,
Bluesy book is it's really interesting. Well, a lot of those guys was coming out of Selinsky. Now, the thing about Coltrane, not just the Selinsky, he because I was close to Ravi and I saw some of the books. And he had the New Art book called New Art, and he also did the Cigar Rasher,
mm,
158 Studies. And yeah, definitely Selinsky. He was searching for things because in Selinsky there was a page where you heard da da da. He played.
yeah.
Um, but the thing about I think that a lot of people don't probably don't really understand, and I learned this from a homeless cat who played saxophone. And, people didn't really give him a lot of time. But then one time I sat down with this guy because I used to play out in the street. He was talking about Coltrane. He said, "Yeah, I knew Coltrane very well. I used to go to his house." And he said, you know, really, what made me knew that he was telling the truth. He said a lot of that stuff that Coltrane was playing came out of a big, thick book from Grand Ole School of Music. And a lot of people don't know about Grand Ole School of Music, but me being from Philly, I knew about Grand Ole School of Music. I said, "Oh yeah." So he studied at Grand Ole School of Music that had a lot of those things. Now, the tradition, you had a lot of Polish and German uh, immigrants in Philly. So a lot of the people in Philly learned from the Schillinger method. Everybody in Philly was talking in numbers. They never would tell you. You go to jam session, they would tell you the key and then give you the 3 6 2 5s or whatever they tell you the tune by the numbers. And Coltrane and all of them. You hear them playing those real technical kind of harmonic things. Benny Golson and Jimmy Heath. They play very almost mathematical. But then there's also a blues tradition, which there was a guy that I used to hang out with. His name was Jimmy Oliver, and he played like Lester Young. So you had both sides of it. You study harmonically, you learn the Schillinger method. You study jazz, you learn the Lester Young, Dexter Gordon school. And that was a Philly tradition that train was coming from. So it's a lot. I think the Slimsky book is just one method of where he was coming from.
So, so inspiration. So you've talked about Coltrane. Obviously, you've talked about the influence your brother had, um, and other players. Uh, who? I mean, if you not to force you to reduce, uh, you know, your influences down to a few people or something, but if I if I had to ask you that question, and you had to sort of give me a few people that maybe you have leaned on more than others.
Um, wow, that's a hard one.
Yeah, it is a tough question. And
Let me answer it like this. I
yeah.
came up and I saw a lot of music. And I saw the Giants of Jazz with Thelonious Monk, Art Blakey, and Sonny Stitt. So I heard musically, but then I heard saxophone technique coming from Sonny Stitt was like he's the one that centered everything from advanced playing to Charlie Parker.
Mm.
So if I can understand Sonny Stitt, and then I can take that and go to Coltrane or Sonny Rollins and those guys. But then I would have the tradition of playing all those kind of things, you know.
Mm.
Um, but then from Sonny Stitt, there's like piano players like Cedar Walton that played changes a certain way. When I first started playing, I was playing. I was more of a free player, you know. Oh, and and then I took that and honed it into harmony and learning harmony. And my brother, he had perfect pitch, so he kind of played free, although he's studied like that. But then everything is in his mind. He can just remember all the stuff, and then it becomes sound, you know. Um, but yeah, Sonny Stitt, and then piano players like Cedar Walton. I could hear what it sounded like through the piano players, Cedar, Bud Powell, and Monk. I can hear the orchestra and how the lines go over the orchestra with those kind of players. You know?
Mm.
Then a straight saxophone, because straight saxophone, I'm just learning one note at a time. But the piano, they seem harmonically to be able to play. So if I want to learn like a song, I listen to the record, but when I listen to the piano player, I can hear what, you know, the structures and stuff.
Yeah, I interviewed Scotty Barnhart, and he was talking about in his approach, he wants to be able to play everything on the piano that he can play on the horn, you know, and vice versa. And just being able to kind of see all of the notes um, and hear all of the notes simultaneously sounding, it gives you a different perspective on, you know, on what's going on rather than just one note at a time, as you were talking about. And um, I think also like understanding more about harmony, like if I learn how to voice some things out on the keyboard, when I go back and listen to certain records, those records will sound different.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
You know,
It,
because you have a different, you got something else that you are pulling from, and
uh,
uh,
well, I
and
can
I
do the cracks. I like to play um, outside. I
mhm,
don't like to play. I mean, I learned how to play, but I like to play the outer. I like to play those connecting things
mhm.
outside of the chord. And um, I was always dedicated to that. And my brother was, he went and started to study all the, like, I was just interested in playing the sax. I wanted to be like, I want to talk about you. I want to be the Sonny Stitt, if I want to talk about your style. But the saxophone, to me, you can play so many things. Like Miles would say, a saxophone should play a lot of notes because you got a whole lot of keys, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah,
And the saxophone, you could do things on the saxophone that, like my on a trumpet, you have to study intensely because you have those three vowels, and you have to, saxophone. We just can blow the note. If you want to play a fifth, you just move your fingers, five fingers up, or you know, something like that, and you have the fifth or something like that. So our imagination, putting our imagination to the instrument, to me, is far beyond just sitting down and harmonically looking at the instrument and then playing something, because we got harmonics, you know, we got overtones, we got so many things that we can incorporate in what we play.
yeah.
So I was always interested in that kind of thing, or in the out I'm gonna say the overtones plus the notes, like when Coltrane played the false fingers, or Sonny Ronald was doing a lot of that in the 60s, and can integrate that with the lines, you know, those kind of things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was I'm consumed by that kind of.
Well, you know, it's that whole false fingering thing. Of course, the the most developed player playing a lot of false fingering, worked out stuff, is Michael Brecker,
Well,
and
Michael
it seems
Cricket,
like
he,
it seems like he has gotten maybe more credit than maybe he actually should have.
Yeah.
because you can hear all of that stuff. I mean, Lester Young is playing false fingering. I mean, it's part of the tradition in, like the palm playing palm D as a middle D, for instance. That's a false fingering.
Yeah.
You know, what were you going to say?
Well, the way Michael Brecker had a worked out version of False Finger. The
Right.
way Coltrane and Sonny Rollins played it, it went. They had another way of doing it because they would play one note, then the false finger, and then the next note in a
Yeah.
phrase.
Mm-hmm.
Or Sonny Rollins would play a whole chorus with just the harmonics,
Mm-hmm.
and then he would bring it back into the regular fingerings, which Mike Brecker way was doing it, which was a pretty incredible way, but it was much different than the way Coltrane and Sonny Rollins did it from my point of view. Because okay, I could learn Mike Brecker's way and I could play that, but I could never really learn Coltrane's way. I have to find a way to do it myself, and and that to me that was a challenge. Unless I played Coltrane's exact solo, but that only worked in that place that Coltrane played it. It didn't work on other songs, and I had to find other songs
Right.
that
Right.
Coltrane played to try to play that kind of thing.
Yeah, or like some of those multiphonics that he played on that tune, Harmonique. Some of that kind of stuff. Yeah, he was doing some stuff, and part of the false fingering, harmonic series manipulation stuff that Coltrane was doing. Um, so he was after a particular timbre, so those false notes don't sound the same, right? They're being they're sounding from a different fundamental, although they may be approximately the same pitch. The other thing is that the intonation is not exactly the same because the saxophone is not perfectly in tune, and when you start dividing different fundamentals, harmonic series, the notes are not necessarily equal. They're not exactly the same note, and I think he was actually implying a different tuning system. So
Yeah.
he could get, almost a quarter tone, you know, away from, whatever the note was. Um, and I was looking at or listening, watching. I got on YouTube or something, and there's some guys now. They have these. They worked out quarter tone scales for saxophone,
Mm-hmm.
and they can play like it's like a chromatic scale, but it's all quarter tones.
Mm-hmm.
A regular saxophone,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But he was accessing that stuff, and I think he was using the sort of harmonic series, the false fingering, as a way to sort of hint towards different tuning systems, because he had been out, far east and middle east, and he was studying the religious music, and there's more notes, you know, available,
Well,
you know.
where I hear he got a lot of that from was Earl Bostic
Mm.
and Dizzy. Dizzy, when you hear Dizzy, he'll play. Dizzy could play uh, every scale on one vowel.
Mm.
He was dealing with like you hear him go. He's playing false fingerings
Right.
and trained play with these. So I start to see the influences of those people in that what he developed. But from my point of view, the false fingerings, to me, I look at it like the spirit world. And then you have the regular notes as the material world. And he is like playing in between the spirit world and the material world.
Mm.
And when I listen to that recording, it's a certain period where he was really that recording creation
Mm.
or feeling good and Nature Boy and all in that period. He was playing those false fingerings. Uh, it was like that. He would play between the notes and the false fingering and creating like that. But the most advanced one I heard was creation because most of that solo was based on false fingerings. So you would hear him play a phrase and with the regular finger, and then he'll play the phrase again in the false fingers. He goes diddle 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 diddle, and then he interweave them,
Yep.
and then he'll play those minor thirds things, and then he'll go into the false fingers with the minor third, and then it comes down, and I'm like, man, where this guy's coming from?
Yeah.
But
You
those
know,
they practiced a lot in those days, and they were trying to transcend. I mean, like I was watching a video with Marion Brown. He called it uh, exhausticity or something like that. He said they just exhausted. They played until they couldn't play anymore. Hours and hours. You know.
yeah, I mean, something I regularly mention to my students and when I do presentations about Coltrane and his incessant practicing, his just never relenting, just uh, that box set, the Atlantic box set called the Heavyweight Champion, and I mean I love all of Coltrane. That's that might be my favorite period. Atlantic might be my favorite period. I love it all. Um, but if you open up the cover of the box set, it has a dictionary definition of the word practice.
Uh, I, I missed that part.
Now
When it,
that's now consider the intention. Uh, consider the magnitude of such a statement. Uh, that a box set released when it was released, um, to have a dictionary definition of the word practice in it. That is that's incredible. That's incredible. I don't know. Is there anything else you would want? That's ridiculous.
you know, practice like that too is James Moody.
Mm.
He put a lot of time and he practiced all the time up until his passing. Like that, like a couple of days before he passed, he was practicing. You know, those guys they put a lot, and you can hear it in the way. But you put a lot of time in, right?
You you have to. There's so much. You know, a beautiful thing about having Charlie Parker and Sonny Stitt and Sonny Rollins and Coltrane and all of these great, incredible players, Coleman Hawkins, Lester Young, and Ben Webster and Johnny Hodges, and I mean we can just keep talking for a long time about all. The great thing about that is that there's no lack of inspiration of to look at it, something from a different perspective, but um, but it also means that more is expected of you because you had that to start with. And the only way that you can even touch any of that stuff is by crazy amounts of practicing. It's just that's I mean there's no other way to even approximate. I mean you can't, you know, and if you're going to do this, then that's what it's going to mean. Fortunate thing for musicians, you know, folks like us, is that we can do this. We can do this until the day we die, and we can be constantly improving the entire time. We never have to stop doing that, as opposed to like an athlete, which has you get to a certain point and it's like, oh, that part is done. Now you need to do something else. That isn't the case
Yeah,
for us. We can just keep doing this.
yeah.
It's beautiful.
Well, I know you know, yeah, yeah. We just have to. It's a part of, you can hear it when somebody play, if they love their instrument, or if they put that time in. And
Mm-hmm.
some people can't express themselves without putting that time in, but you can hear the person that put that time in and have the command of that instrument, and can play things in any place or unexpected places that feel like, when you hear it, they might be having a hard time on it, but you can hear that it don't sound like it, like a
Mm-hmm.
person like Sonny Stitt, who just have flawless, you can do anything on the saxophone.
Uh, you know, um, you mentioned Sonny Stitt when I was asking you to distill and you know, uh, in if I had to say the same thing, I would say Sonny Stitt and John Coltrane.
Mm-hmm.
Those would be the two biggest influences. But then, like I'm saying, uh, I'm influenced by piano players and guitar players and trumpet players and um, you know, and all kinds of different music. I mean, today there's so much uh, fusion going on, a lot of combinations of different styles, which I think is interesting. Um, so there's all of that. I'm very influenced by gospel music, and um, and so all of that stuff is in there. With Sonny Stitt, uh, it seems to me that it's hard for me to find a player, a post Sonny Stitt player, and it doesn't matter. They could be a piano player, saxophone player, trumpet player, trombone player. It doesn't matter what it is, what their instrument is. It's hard for me to find a bass player. It's hard for me to find uh, a musician that has a lot of precision, accuracy, clarity, um, precise change playing, rhythmic accuracy, all of those kinds of those qualities um, that hasn't been very influenced by Stitt.
That's what Jackie McLean told me. Sonny Stitt was their university. And when Sonny Stitt went to tenor, and then you start to see more tenor players being able to play like Bird. And
Mm.
he said when Sonny Stitt picked up the baritone, and then you started to see more baritone players coming out. So he said he was their university, and they learned how to play Charlie Parker on their instruments through Sonny Stitt.
And that was my story because the first Sonny Stitt was my first big influence. All I wanted to do was listen to Stitt and try to sound like Stitt. That was my thing. Um, and I backed into Charlie Parker,
Mm-hmm.
because Sonny Stitt, because he was so precise
Mm-hmm.
and so clear
Mm-hmm.
that um, it made Charlie Parker more palatable. It made it less challenging to dissect what it was that Charlie Parker was doing, because Charlie Parker is more uh, what's the he's more squirrely, and more kind of sort of bursts, bursts of energy, and he's a little bit more that way, whereas Stitt is a little more um, pensive. It's very it's kind of this is the wrong thing to say, but it's kind of more like a level-headed, and very uh, worked out, thought out, but it never sounded that way. That's what's so incredible. Everything he played sounds so melodic and fresh, but it was so surgically placed.
Well, this is what I kind of say. Bird played in 6 and 3,
Mm,
and Sonny Stitt played in 4.
mm.
So Bird was more like dip boop be da do 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 do. He played. It's almost like he was playing free. Sonny Stitt played. He played great. straight down the middle.
Yeah.
Bird did everything. He played straight down the middle, but then, like you said, he had burst in this. But Bird kind of played free. You know, I think Ornette played closer to Bird.
Mm.
And if you put Ornette and Stitt together, you probably would have Bird.
Mm.
Ornette is, you know, Ornette had the sound and could sing it with woo, get those sounds like Bird and all of that. He wasn't playing Bird's notes, although he was playing Bird's notes. But he didn't know that it was worked out things. He thought Bird was just totally improvising from the top of his head, so he would play like that. And Sonny Stitt just had the precision of Charlie Parker. But Bird, coming from Bird's mind, I thought he played kind of free. When I heard that record one night in Washington, and he was changing the keys with the band, didn't know the music, and there was one point where the band was playing and it sounded like it was the end, and Bird played an end cadence, and then somebody said, "Play, Bird," and he just played. Or there was a break, da 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 da, boom, and there was a break. Somebody said, "Play, Bird, Bird," it just could just play right when somebody said play. You know, that's free. You know? But I saw Sonny Stitt play a few times. What's interesting what you were saying about like the different music. When I was listening to jazz at a young age, we'd go to a concert, and like I saw a concert where James Brown opened up for Count Basie. And then he would introduce Count Basie as his friend, and he said, "I live around the corner from him. I'll go over to his house for coffee."
Mm.
And you would go see James Brown, you could see Count Basie, or you could see, you know, right before Earth, Wind and Fire had their hit, they had Earth, Wind and Fire we playing, and then you had Gary Bartz, and you know, you had all these. It was all, the music was all one. It wasn't divided up like that. And I remember when Mike Brecker kind of came on the scene from my point of view, was with the Horace Silver recording.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I went and I saw that band, and it's funny because I went to him and I was like, what kind of mouthpiece you play? He was playing an Autolink 7-star, and he wrote it. Then years later, me and him, we did a record together, and he didn't know that when I told him, you know, I mean, it's like from a little boy, now we're doing a record together. And it was funny, we played on Inner Urge on my brother's record recording, and they didn't want me to play. The producers didn't want me. They just wanted me to play the melody with Mike Brecker because Mike didn't know. I knew because we was playing that in the band, so I kind of knew the melody a little better than Mike did the way we was doing it, because we had all these meter changes. But Mike had it, but they just wanted me to play. So Mike leaned over to me and said, "Hey, let's battle," you know. And I was like, "They don't want me." He said, "What they gonna do? Fire me?" So me and him, we had a little tenor battle, and it was like, you know. And then we went on break after a few takes. Then we went on break and had some food. And I came back, and I was like, and he was like, you know, he was very consistent. You know, but I remember when Mike Brecker came on the scene, jazz kind of changed when the Brecker brothers came out with their first record and all of that, and then jazz went more into the educational, what we know it today. Because before that, jazz, you just learned it on the street. There was no school for jazz. Well, you had Berkeley and you had North Texas State, but they weren't really like, you didn't learn jazz in schools. You learned it on the street. So if I wanted to know how to play jazz, I went to school and learned how to play the saxophone, but then I had to go into the nightclub with the local cats and try to learn how to play jazz. And they weren't that nice. They weren't like trying to show you anything. Well, I hung out with Dexter when I was in high school, and he never talked about all my relationship with Dexter and Dizzy and all those guys when we was coming up. They never talked about, you know, jazz. They always told stories of their experiences in the music, but they never talked about music harmonically. You know, and even to this day, you know, I was close with Wayne Shorter, and I went over his house. He showed me all his book collections. But we kind of get to some things about sound, but he was telling me concepts and stuff, but not harmonic things. Now you can go to school and just harmonically learn things. I don't know if what's better because we wanted to learn the music so bad that we had to try to figure out what they were doing. Like I remember hanging out, listening to Dexter, and Dexter played something that was pretty incredible, and I had it in my mind, and I was like, I was like, I'm gonna go home. I had to walk home because it was too late. And I walked home with this in my mind. And I had it in my mind. And then somebody saw me at the section was trying to rob me. And I got into a fight with this cat. And the police came. But I still had it in my mind because I was trying to hold on what Dexter had. And then when I got home and pulled out my horn, I forgot it. And then I would go and get the records and try to hear it. And he didn't play like on the records that he did, like he did in the concerts. But then when I look back on it, what helped me was that it allowed me to have my own interpretation of what that might sound like.
I see. Yeah.
Then if Dexter showed me that, then I would play it just like Dexter or something like that. So I think it's a give and take with education today versus how we learned in the old days. It was just a school, but then in those days you had enough gigs that you can learn that way. Today is not enough gigs. There's not enough, like you can't go on the road with a band for the year and go through the hard knocks and learning. Like it's just not happening today. So the only way that we can really learn is somebody can sit down and show you what that what that actually is. And then you got to take it from there when you get out of the school, or when you got to be creative with that.
Yeah, it's definitely a different ball game. Obviously with less gigs, less opportunities to play this music, um, and sort of more players that are capable, sort of fighting over the same gigs.
Yeah.
Um, it kind of changes certain dynamics. And then now, where the club was you know, was the institution. Now higher education is the institution. Um,
I was on the road with Alvin, and I learned lessons like he would say. One time he'd come to me and say like, you sound good tonight, baby. And I said, but Alvin, I was fighting him. He said, don't let it win. Or one time he came to me and gave me a compliment, and I kind of took it to tell him, because we set up with the horns and then the drums, and then on the other side of the drums is the bass and the piano, and he didn't let us use monitors in that band, and he wouldn't let us put the horn in the mic. So I said, Elvin, and he playing, you know how Elvin playing on it. So I said, you sounded good. I said, but Elvin, I couldn't hear myself. He said, well, if you know what you're doing, you don't have to hear yourself. And I kind of got mad at that. And next day I got to the gig and I turned my back and I played really soft. And he heard every note that I played. So I said, oh, I understand that, and I maybe understand about projection. It's not about, because you're never going to outplay a drummer. A drummer, he hit that drum and cymbals, he hit these things, and you're trying to blow louder than that. You're not going to really outplay it, but you still have to find a way to project. And he would tell me things like, well, you look at the person in the back of the room and you play to that person, no matter how loud or soft you play, they will hear it. And then it got me to a point where I don't have to overblow the instrument. I could just blow. And see, those lessons you don't get. And then one time we played in a place, and we played Lonnie's Lament. And, played the melody, and then we went through all this stuff. And after we finished, man, I got a standing ovation. And it was a spiritual experience for me. And I went to Elvin and said, wow, I didn't know the song played like that. He said, yeah, and if you don't play a Coltrane song with me, you would never know how to play Coltrane's music. And it made sense to me. Now, and I could tell somebody that, but it made sense to me because I actually did it with them. And
yeah.
you get a chance to play with these kind of people and how they guide you. They might be nice, they might not be nice, but they're guiding you, and it puts you in a position and then you understand how to execute based off of what they have learned and have passed down to you. And now you have more people today, and I try to tell these young people, although you should know how to play it, but jazz didn't start with giant steps. So you can play giant steps through the keys. That don't mean you're playing jazz. You
That's right.
so you have to learn. And through those elders like that, you learn how to play jazz, and then you take your giant steps and your jazz, and you become who you are.
So I just wanted to ask you maybe one more question, just about maybe some goals or some unfinished projects maybe you're working on right now, or maybe a recording that you have in the pipeline. Um, so what do you have on deck?
I, I I just put out a recording, and actually you can hear it on YouTube. It's
Okay.
Antoine Roney trio, and I have my son on drums, who's a pretty incredible drummer. He's been playing with me. He's 15 right now and playing incredible, you know. And we're doing a lot of things together right now. I'm trying to, especially in this time of the lockdown and all that. I'm trying to find a way to uh, compose music based off of how I play or something like that. Like you got Charlie Parker, and he'll play, the but later, he played his lines. He made the songs based off of his lines and harmonic concepts. I'm trying to find a way. I hope I get to it pretty soon. I'm trying to find a way of playing the way that I play and creating music. Because like when I write something now, I'm writing it based off of something that inspired me a while ago. So my song might sound like this, or might sound like that, or it's inspired by that. So I'm writing songs in the old traditional way. I'm trying to find ways to write songs from now where I'm at now into the future. And a lot of musicians today, like you listen to musicians, or people come to your concerts. Years ago, people, knew the songs that you were playing. Now, people come to your concerts, they don't really know. They can't tell you, they can't walk away from the concert and say, he played this song, that song, this song, that song. They just going with the experience of the music, you
Right.
know. And so it's really open for us to be as creative as we want to be within the style of music that we were playing. Because there's no hit. It's not really like they got hit. Most of the hit things are probably you know hip hop kind of things, and it's not based off of. It's based off of poetry or something like that. But there's not really too many songs, although people still love music and songs, but they don't. They listen to it for the experience, not for the song. Today it seems like.
Right. Well, it's like the for the experience, not necessarily the tradition or the lineage. Uh, the canon. The song belongs to the canon. So so I'm into it for that reason. But like you said, more of an experience type of thing. Yeah. Um, and you were saying something about some of those videos on my YouTube channel. I started doing those lesson of the week videos again. They're called Lessons with Dr. Thunder
Okay.
now, and so those are there's a few. I don't know. There's probably about 6 or 7 new episodes,
Okay.
and when the school year gets back in, I'll continue on with that. And
Well,
but
you're very valuable. You're valuable to me, and in the saxophone community. I think I try my best to tell as many people that is coming up about you, because you're very thorough in your playing. It's almost like Sonny Stitt in a way, where you can hear that you have that you didn't cut any corners, and you challenge the saxophone in that way. and I think that that should be a standard for saxophone playing, and with that, along with the creativity, we have to understand. Okay, you got people who have technique, but they're not so creative. And then you have creative people, but then the technique is kind of lacking. And you kind of in the middle ground where you're creative, but you have the saxophone technique to play the instrument from the bottom to the top. And I think a lot of that is missing in saxophone playing today, other than people who would study Michael Brecker, but then they play Michael Brecker. You
Mm.
know? And we have to find a way of, okay, you learn Michael Brecker and you know that technique. So don't play Michael Brecker, play the technique that it comes from and create in your own style. You know?
Thanks for saying that, man. I really appreciate it. Um, and it means a lot coming from you. And is there anything else that you wanted to mention?
Um, well, I would like to, we got to either get together or we got to do another one because there's so many things that involves saxophone where you can get into mouthpiece concepts, reed
Oh yeah.
concepts, the instrument itself, like the tube, like you're saying, is conical,
Hmm.
um, and you have to understand the note from the top to the bottom in instruments and how to get all the notes out evenly because it's not an even instrument.
No, it's not.
So you get down on low register, and then you have to understand the diaphragm and how to play, and all those kind of things are very important um, just to talk about. And everybody has their own concepts about
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we could do like we could do a few of these actually. Maybe it wouldn't be for these quarantine interviews, but we could do like a few sessions where we talk about, break down some concepts and stuff. I think people would really enjoy that. You have so much to share, so much information, and yeah. So that'd be great. Thank you so much for your time, and I pray for you and your family. I pray for our community and our world. I pray that we get out of this thing as soon as possible, and that we can all get back on the stage in front of an audience.
it. I did a thing on Facebook, and it was, and I think they're gonna put something out on the Jazz Foundation. But first,
Mm.
I played around midnight, and I dedicated to all the people that passed on.
Yeah.
And I just did it, and I put it up. As soon as I put it up, it really hit me. I kind of, when it was on the outside looking in, and it was touching to me. As soon as I put it up on Facebook, and saw it
Mhm.
from an angle. Oh wow! And I got a lot of good response from it. But then I did the same thing. They wanted me to do that on, for Jazz Foundation. That's coming on tomorrow, I guess, around the same time.
Yeah, man, that was really. Um, I mean, that was great. I don't have any. I don't know exactly the word to say, but it was really great. Um, um, I saw that, and
Okay, good. I was sick because after my brother passed, that day that he passed, I just got sick. And I don't know if it was the virus or if it was just heartbroken. For 2 weeks, I didn't, I just sat in one place for 2 weeks. And I didn't play the horn for a while. So when I did that was, I just picked it. Man, my son was like, come on, dad, let's play. So and I really, I didn't, I still was, my chops wasn't really, wasn't, I'm a little stronger now. So, but I did that. Someone just told me to do that, and it just came out. And when I saw that, and I was like, it was touching to me, outside of playing it.
yeah, it was touching to me. Yeah. So, all right, man. I'm again. Thank you so much for your time and your energy. Thank you for for doing this, and we'll have to, like I said, we'll have to collaborate on something else. And I'm going to bring you to Ohio State sometime in the near future, uh, even if it's just to do a master class. But I'd probably like to uh, bring you to Ohio State in conjunction with our annual jazz festival.
Okay.
Have you bring your band. I want to do that. So,
Oh, thanks.
yeah,
We could just hang out.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All right, man. Well, be safe.
You too. Blessings to you too.
All right, now.